Welcome, everybody who's here live joining us for this LinkedIn Live edition today with Patrick Andrews, and for those who are watching the recording as well. So I'm very excited to do this LinkedIn Live again today with Patrick. And also, just to give you a brief overview, what's the overall purpose and intention of the Unbossing Leadership LinkedIn Live series? I've brought in really exciting people who don't just know their stuff in theory, but out there, especially in a region from Spain, that have been implementing exciting approaches that have actually worked significantly in the last 20 years to bring in self-management and actually bring teal to life and bring movement to this movement. And today I'm joined by somebody who actually knows for quite a long time some of these major players, and he will help me illuminate more about, how to approach self-management. Has a lot of knowledge, has published a book. It's Patrick Andrews, as I said. I'm just going to say a little bit of an introduction to Patrick. He's a lawyer by training, a questioner by nature, and longtime companion to businesses seeking a more human way forward. He's known as the Barefoot Lawyer for his off-grid, values-led legal work, and he now co-leads Regenerative Governance, a nonprofit exploring how businesses can be owned, governed, and run in ways that nourish life rather than extract from it. His work sits at the intersection of law, structure, and soul, which I love particularly, and he's especially interested in how the invisible architecture of ownership and governance shapes culture, behavior, and power in organizations, and how these structures might be reimagined to support participation, wholeness, and responsibility. So Patrick is also going to speak about his recently published book, The Incomplete Circle. I'm excited to hear more in detail about that. And he says it's both a type of love poem to business and at the same time a gentle provocation to the business world altogether. Welcome, Patrick, here to the Unbossing Leadership LinkedIn Live series.
Thank you, Marion. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to be here with you. So I'm excited. We'll do a little bit of what the viewers and listeners have already become accustomed to. We want to know, of course, who you are as a person. How have you become who you are today? Who cares about this topic from deeply within? At least that's how I've gotten to know you. There's a story that's your individual, your personal purpose. I'd like to start with that, and then later on we'll go into other topics that you and I have already more or less agreed on in our prep call. And as we have agreed, we can also, of course, deviate and go to the places that emerge here and now. Yeah, so let us know a little bit about your story, how you describe the three phases of your career, and anything that you think might help us really connect with you and what you're trying to bring into the world.
Okay. Well, the starting story I think I'd like to share goes back a long time, nearly 50 years.
Okay.
I was brought up in a city, and when I was 13, my parents, I've got two brothers, my parents thought we need a break in the summer holidays. So the three of us were sent off to a holiday camp in Norfolk in northeast, in eastern England. And I think at that age, 13, you're quite impressionable, very impressionable. And I fell in love with nature. So, and more than that, actually, there was a week of just being outdoors, sleeping on the ground in tents, and particularly sort of playing games in the woods and rolling around in the mud, and then sitting around the campfire singing songs. And it almost sounds a bit cheesy, but it was like a peak experience somehow of connection with nature, with mud and earth and trees and wind, the wind on my face, and also with people, being in that sort of connected space so I think that strand of sort of a love of connection, of togetherness, both with people and with life, with the outdoors, has stayed with me for ever since. And then I get to 18, time to leave school and entering into sort of the world of work. So what do? Well, I was pointed towards law or teaching, and chose law without really much thought. And I think weaving though, and I guess I had a certain aptitude for complex thinking. I was good at maths and so on, so that would seem to be a good chart course. But I think the rest of my story really is about, can be described as how I wove together, or seeking to weave together those two strands: a deep love of people, of life, of nature, and that legal thing, which is really about how we create collective norms and then embed them and make them larger than life, if you like. And very often more important than life. We get lost in the law. Yeah. And so my sort of struggles in a way to make sense of how law works and doesn't work, and what we do about it.
Yeah, thank you. And I know you have a lot more to share, but what listening to you kind of reminds me of is also something that I heard from you earlier, which is probably a sense of wholeness that you experienced early on in your life when you connected, and there was a state of something that I'm guessing is a longing inside of you to kind of help bring that forth, even in the world of business where we feel such disconnect and far away from feeling like wholeness and integration. So I'm just guessing that there is something that you know is possible in your whole being from early on, and that you're now seeking to at least contribute to.
Yeah, nice. I think wholeness by intuition. It's not something you can, if you think about it, that's almost the opposite of wholeness, because the thinking tends to analyze and pull apart, and wholeness is more a feeling. And so you're right that in a way, there's a part of me that's been spending 50 years trying to get back to the campsite and sit around singing songs.
Right.
And the thing about business, which may seem bizarre for people who haven't been in that world, is that I've definitely touched on many occasions that feeling in business meetings, in gatherings, in you're working as a team on something. I think of working for a large aerospace company who made what we thought were the best aircraft engines in the world, or a property company when we were setting up joint ventures in Russia, and we were very connected and very entrepreneurial and creative. And then you're traveling overnight on a train from St. Petersburg to Moscow and eating sausage with the Russians opposite you and exchanging a few words of Russian. And there's a lot of and I've traveled a lot, and I've found in different places those experiences. And I suppose then what I've also experienced is a sort of an invasive force of money, of external owners, managers, shareholders who say, forget all that. What you're really here for is to make money for us, or to do what we say. And so I found that clash of finding this wholeness, this connection, and then actually losing it again. And I suppose there's constantly, I've either left a job or I've tried to change the circumstances to come back to that sense of wholeness. Yeah. Well spotted.
Yeah. Before we go maybe even more deeply into that invasive force and what you've discovered about it and what you're working with, I wonder if for our listeners and audience, if you can just share a little bit about those phases of your life so that we know who you are, what's your expertise, what are the dimensions of business that you've explored, and what were the things that you discovered that led you then to doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, great. So yeah, it's I guess the way I think about it, the first phase was in a way climbing the corporate ladder, finding my place. So I started off and trained in a law firm. That was very competitive and aggressive. I didn't enjoy it, didn't feel at home. So I managed to shift into working for a very in-house for a large company. And that felt much more part of a team, much more creative, much more connected to sort of real life, if you like. It's still sitting in an office, but you're working with finance people and marketing people and engineers and trying to say, we want to partner with this company. So I worked in England, Paris, Montreal, ended up in St. Petersburg in Russia. So when I like adventures, I guess I get bored easily. So I kept trying things and just learned my trade of how the legal framing, the legal way of thinking, when applied in a business context, can really help give structure and value. And so it really helps So I really enjoyed that, listening to people and helping guide them. So that was about 15 years. And then, I ended up working for one of Europe's biggest retailers, buying companies for £200 million on the stock exchange and so on, and working with Goldman Sachs. And it's a very high level, very high finance. And then I sort of had a spiritual crisis where I'd been to I fell in love, got married to somebody who had an Indian guru, and I found that very, very strange and bizarre, but I was in love. So we went to India. And I guess this holy man, 𝗳𝗵𝗲, he was called, just changed the way I saw the world or experienced the world. And then I came back and I was still working as a corporate lawyer, and I was trying to make sense of this. But what I started to come into my awareness was what we collectively are doing to the planet. And I've done pilgrimages to rainforests. All around the world, but I was part of a system that was chopping down old rainforests for money, and we couldn't really explain why we were doing it. We were just in a cult-like way, just driven to do it by forces beyond our control, and no one was talking about it. We were just doing it because growth was the religion. This is the language I use now. At the time, I just got deeply confused. I'm part of a system which is destroying this stuff, and we're not talking about it.
Right.
And that cult of sort of silence was really, really painful. So in 2002, I got out. Basically, I thought I can't be part of this anymore.
Wow. Okay.
And before I left, I was wandering about, saying, "There's some bad stuff going on here. This is bad. It's not good to burn the Amazon and chop it down meaninglessly. Where are the bad people doing this?" And I wandered about and thought, well, it's not the CEO. He's not a bad person. I really admire him. It's not the head of strategy. I don't like the finance director, but I respect her. And I came to this point of saying, well, if there's an evil empire here, I'm definitely part of it myself. I can't see myself as morally or fundamentally different from these people. I've just seen something that maybe they're not seeing. What is it, was the question I had. What is it that takes thoughtful, intelligent, responsible people and turns them into a collectively uncaring, stupid, and irresponsible? What happens when people get into it? What's the collective psychology of this system that we're part of and that I'm part of? And I thought, I don't feel I can make it. It's too powerful for me. I don't even understand it. I better get out. So I got out. Right. And then I thought we spent 10 years in this type of wilderness, in a way, of just going around asking idiot questions. Maybe charities are better than this, and actually, well, in some ways they're worse. There's a lot of pathology and hidden dynamics in the not-for-profit sector which aren't publicly admitted. And I helped, and then I bumped into a colourful entrepreneur, and he said, well, I'm designing a new car company, an eco car company. I need a new legal structure that changes the way we behave. So I said, oh, can I work with you? So I worked with him for years. 𝗪𝗺, it's still going. They're one of the only hydrogen car companies in the world, with the planet as a shareholder. So really just playing about and experimenting and learning and a deep dive. And I think then that was phase 2, was really going down the rabbit hole, I call it in my book. And then I just came to a stop. I just thought I was trying to be zero carbon, but my son had nappies, which is a whole thing. How in our society, you just find limits of how truly zero carbon you can be in a society which drives you in the opposite direction. And I just had to somehow stop. And one way of thinking about it is a breakdown, but in a way it was sort of an unlearning, just a stopping to try and reflect and make space. Which isn't that uncommon, I think, a sort of a dive into the soul to say, who am I? What is this Patrick thing wandering about on this planet, spinning through space? What am I here for? And I think part of that's also to do with death. I had some years before, when I was 30, somebody close to me died, and it was a young person. And it was sort of, they got cancer at a young age, and 9 months later they were dead. And it was one of those moments that really makes you stop and say, oh, life is not what I thought it was. What is life all about? And just set off a deep inquiry. And so I think all these things, this disillusionment with my work, this sort of spiritual awakening in India, all these things came together to say, this makes no sense anymore. I've got to find a new way of understanding the world.
Right.
And so I guess I sort of came out of that about just over a decade ago, 10, 11 years ago, when I suddenly started to get, I don't know, a deeper philosophy about life and understanding that, I'm the product of 6 billion years of evolution, and that it's unlikely to stop with me. And if it does, there's something there there's some hope, I suppose. There's some hope that even if we're, just trying to destroy the life systems of the planet in a bizarre way, and we're allowing war and all sorts of violence to go on around us. There's violence the way we treat animals. I mean, the list goes on, right? That there's still hope and we can play our part. So that was when I came out and I thought, well, I am going to keep doing a law, because that was the question. I am going to keep doing a law.
Okay.
I'll do it in a different way. It will be with integrity. I'm not going to go back and work in the old world. I'll see who wants to work with me in a spirit of let's regenerate, let's rethink the way we work, and let's redesign organizations. And then the last sort of 12 years has really been working with the likes of Dunya and Lisa Gill, who you've had on you've interviewed,
Right.
working with people looking at teal, meeting the people from K2K in Spain, who you mentioned, meeting Henry Lichtmanowitz, who wrote the Liberating Structures book. So really people who are learning about sociocracy, fundamentally people who have gone well beyond saying we've got a problem to saying let's actively work on reshaping, rethinking, building a new model, a new mainstream. And it's a parallel one, which is almost got nothing to do with the old mainstream, except the roots are the same, but it fundamentally starts from a different fundamental mindset. So that's been the work of the last 10, 12 years. And I've worked with, I've helped companies convert to employee ownership in a very participatory way. I've helped people think through in their investment models. A library of things is one example. Just really been creatively playing with legal models and so, which haven't fundamentally changed since 1855 in the UK. So we think we're so modern and clever, but we're still using models that were current in the times before we had electricity in this country, or before we had, when the population of London was like 3 million, and and the population of the world was maybe 1 billion, and we're still thinking those models work. And they sort of do for small people, but we're more and more they're failing us. Is my
Couldn't agree more. And just to highlight what I loved about your story, many things, but one that stood out is how at some point you realize, I'm looking at these human beings, and you didn't seem to fall into the trap of saying, oh, this person, the CEO or whoever, to kind of polarize even more. So kind of almost amplifying the very thing that, is maybe causing the trouble that you were experiencing, that you call disillusionment. But you started to kind of step away and look at systems, is what I understand. So looking at systems that shape behavior and culture, etc. So that was something that your ways of thinking that likes complexity and frameworks and tools and theories was able to kind of look at and experiment with. That's what I'm understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. I think, we talked about wholeness earlier. What I found very often in business, and why I stayed there for years, was that more often than not, I found an experience of connection, of teamwork, of collaboration, of belonging. So it was impossible for me to then separate myself out and say those are bad people.
Yeah, right.
And every time I'd catch myself doing that, first of all, I'd get Shakespeare tapping me on the shoulder and saying, things are neither good nor bad, but thinking makes them so. And I'd also find myself thinking, well, if they're bad, then I am as well. And because I've been in there. And so I think it just became impossible philosophically, intellectually, any other way to think these people who I'd, shared ups and downs and all sorts of experiences, to think I'm morally any different, and therefore, but I don't consider myself a bad person. So then they're not. So then it forces me, and also because I was an architect of legal structures, so I knew that it makes a difference. And so that was a clear line of inquiry. I know that how you structure the company, what powers you give to shareholders, to the board, and so on. That's a choice, and we can make different choices, and we'll get different behaviors. And psychology backs us up. There's all sorts of studies about what hierarchy does to people and how it tends to shrink the sort of moral, it diverts the moral capacity from how do I care for people to how do I care what the boss wants. There's lots of studies back in the 60s in Harvard and so on. So yeah, so you're right. I had to come back and say it's the system. Of course, it doesn't mean that people, I absolve everybody from any responsibility, but I also have to take my own responsibility too. And so therefore it brings a discipline. I won't understand this if I'd simply say bad people, good people. It just makes no sense to me anymore.
Yeah. And maybe this is a good point where we can then pick up what you said earlier, the invasive forces that you recognized and that you made assumptions or, meaning making, I suppose, to say, what if growth wasn't the religion and there was another way to do it? And you seem to be drawn naturally to different flavors to be associated with self-management. You spoke about 𝗫sos, you spoke about sociocracy, liberating structures. So different people on this planet for the last decades have tried to come up with practices to redesign, to reimagine, to reinvent organizations and how we organize ourselves. So what did you recognize and what have you done with these insights?
Yeah. If you look at the deep philosophy, the philosophers trying to make sense of what's happening, they often come to this theme of separation. They say we've separated out head and body, we've separated out humans from nature,
from each other.
Yeah, that's right. So different parts of the brain. There's books about Ian McGilchrist talks about the right brain, which sort of sees holes, should be the master, but it's become the servant, and it's the analytical part of it which is in control, if you like. If you translate that, if you take that insight and look at an organization, you can see how at small scale you can often find a sense of wholeness and lack of, you get a founder who's passionate, they come from the heart, they bring in people, there's a small team, they all feel it, you can feel it. As soon as you scale, the traditional thinking says, oh, you need a board. You need a small number of people equivalent of the head, and then the law mandates it. You need a head which is in control, right? So and there's lots of good and not very good reasons for that. One of the reasons is, as an owner, and if you've got 50 employees, how do you control or manipulate? Well, it's really hard. But if you have a board of 5 people who you appoint, then you can manipulate and control and dialogue with and leave them to control the rest. So it doesn't mean that the organism needs a board, but the owners do. So, and the law needs it too. If you want to put you can't put a whole company in jail, but you can put the board in jail. So it's, in a way, it's a power move to say, this is a messy thing, these humans, so we want to control it, so let's have a board. But what that does is it immediately separates us out into the board, who get paid more and do the thinking and they hold the power and the responsibility. And then you get people below them, and and as I said, hierarchy, there's all sorts of evidence that the lower you are in the hierarchy, the less long you live, the less healthy you are, the less empowered agency you feel, and therefore you're not going to feel I'm going to care for the planet or for my neighbors more than actually I'll care what the boss thinks. So there's something about hierarchy that's how we respond to it. And then above the board then is the shareholders, who by law have no responsibility, but they have eternal power. You buy a share, and as long as the company lasts, you can keep the share. So, and there's no sense of, so in a way the rights of the owner are unlimited, but their responsibility is highly limited, and that tends to breed immorality, a complete lack of any, no responsibility that shareholders. Of course, people can choose to, but the law doesn't encourage it, and in a way, actually discourages it, and also didn't give them any power to make decisions. So you get this separation at multiple levels, and between senior managers and junior levels, junior managers, and you can see this particularly in more old-fashioned companies. Famously, the aerospace company Rolls-Royce, not the car company, but the aerospace company, had 9 different canteens. you'd have a canteen for the board, you'd have a canteen for the senior management, the canteen for the not so senior management, and a canteen for like that 9 levels of and you have gold taps in the board, because they're a rich company, and you'd get the cheapest worst food in the bottom canteen. So that's one manifestation of it. So that disconnection also is in all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Disconnection from our head and heart, and so on, from our head and our body. So what I ended up in my inquiry focusing on is what redesigns can we do to the structure, and also then you have to look into deep human psychology and trying to understand what motivates and drives human beings. Because otherwise you can tweak ownership and other models, but if it doesn't touch the individuals, I'm not interested. It's not going to have the impact.
It has to go hand in hand, structures and of course also how human beings function.
Very often I see people either grabbing, it's all about the people and let's do let's get people and give them agency, and they ignore the ownership. Like actually Lulu did, he didn't talk about ownership. It's not important. And then he'd wonder why every now and then owners would come in and just get rid of self-management because that mindset says I need control. Equally, people who get obsessed about ownership, co-ops and steward ownership, which are lovely models in the right place, but if you ignore the actual, so I suppose I have in my journey have tended to weave in and out of, it's the structures, it's the people, it's the structures and the people. So I absolutely loved working with the tough people. So Lisa Gill, who you interviewed in 𝗲𝗵𝗆, but she also works with tough.
Right.
So coaching managers to let go control and to be adult rather than parent-child. But I also loved, I really like the steward ownership people, the employee ownership movement's interesting. Sociocracy, which is trying to, put a new operating system in, which heals in a way. But it kept coming back to me. It's the wholeness. So how do you get not just how do you change all the layers of the onion? Ownership, governance, management, leadership, self-organizing. How do you affect? And I think the ones who've come closest to it probably is 𝗂2𝗂 and 𝗪𝗳. So sociocracy is almost, they don't consciously much talk about the board and the ownership model, but 𝗪𝗳 and 𝗂2𝗂 in a way was agnostic about ownership. They just said we will come in. So shall I talk a little about what I know about 𝗂2𝗂? Is that useful?
I'm sure. Yeah. Because that's, as you know, one of my passions. I'm still actually in this moment in Spain near Barcelona to create some more relationships and learn more about 𝗂2𝗂 that actually has been vital in bringing the NER Group's approach and Koldo Sarachaga's approach to organizational transformation. And I just want to say a couple sentences because I think it's really something that stands out in this field to say, even way before Frédéric Laloux came out with his book, Koldo was already doing something in the Basque Country, phenomenally successful. I don't know if he ever called it self-management, self-organization, but he seemed to have a strong instinct and based on values that made sense to him. So he cared. And my understanding is that he was successful over many years then with the agency 𝗂2𝗂, as you named it. It's kind of more or less centralized in the Basque Country in northern Spain, but now more and more also in different places. There's something to be said about, more than 100 transformations that have worked for such a long time and actually still the ownership being the same. And the self-management, the new operating system has not been reversed. So yeah, let's dive into that a little bit. I know you go way back also with Dunya and others from that network.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose what I should say that what people who speak to me about this stuff often find that I'm always trying to go back to first principles. What does it mean to be human? Because I think answers that make false assumptions just lead you down the wrong avenues, and you tend to oversimplify and so on. So what I really appreciated when I met the people from 𝗂2𝗂 was the starting point is love. The universe is love. That's the starting point. And human relationships. So we sit around the campfire. So the basic, in a way, this shifting from the triangle to the circle, that's the shift, right?
Yes.
if you just start from that, then you've got it, right? And it doesn't really matter
yeah.
which path you go down. But if you shift from somebody needs to be in charge, the left brain, the numbers, the money, the power, that someone needs to be in charge, to, well, we're all in a web of life, and every strand is, everything we do affects strands of the web of life. So start from, and that's love is what the philosophers and the deep wisdom traditions tell us. So you start from that, and he says, well, okay, the model that's become familiar and mainstream assumes a sort of fairly cynical view of what humans are. They need to be motivated, need to be controlled, somebody needs to be in charge, unreliable, and so on. And it's true that actually individual humans can be unreliable, because we're social creatures. We're not good on our own, actually. So we get lots of human error. But so the insight from self-management is, okay, so we're in a circle. That's where the core of this is not an individual, it's a circle. So what the founder of 𝗕𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗄, who I haven't met, but this is my understanding. This term he uses, I think, new style of relationships. 𝗴𝗺𝗺𝗲𝗄𝗀 relaciones in Spanish, I think. And so that's the starting point. And he says, okay, so we're going to work. Everyone in the organization is a team, and the organization is steered. It may be called the board, but it's a pilot which is representative of all the teams across the organization. And we come from trusting people, not mistrusting them. And I think that all sounds very nice and in a bit in theory, and lots of people have said that. Well, how do you actually do it? So what he then did was say, well, let's starting from first principles, let's be radical. What is it that stops that? Well, one thing that stops it is the manager being paid 20 times more than the junior. Let's be real, right? That is, if someone's paid £1 million and someone's on minimum wage, you're not going to have that feeling of teamwork. And so he says, okay, so we don't do that. We don't have special financial deals. And the second thing is we tell everyone what everyone's paid. And immediately those are in the mainstream world, that's incredibly radical. And maybe he only gets away with it, or has got away with it initially, because in the Basque region, which was where the Germans practiced their carpet bombing, in preparation for the Second World War. It's very mountainous. I went there years ago, and it's very mountainous, and you find people are sort of hemmed in by the mountains in tight communities. And so you get a lot of cooperatives where, people are used to just being part and knocking up against each other.
Yeah, so a sense of community made it maybe possible, and was one of the ingredients and success factors. Yeah,
I think that's right. I think it was the fertile ground, whereas on the plains of Madrid, it might have been much harder to get going. For example.
Yeah, which is something for us to learn from, right? So how can we create a sense of community and make it more likely?
I think that's right, because you can see the same in the UK with co-ops in mining villages, and tight communities give fertile ground for co-ops, whereas London, you don't get many co-ops because it's just different. So you need to rethink about, well, what does connection mean, and how do we think differently about this? So I think that's in a way, what impressed me was the integrity of the thinking, that he didn't just talk about one thing but it was very special circumstances. He says, actually, we start radical, we deviate from the mainstream, we go back to first principles, and then take an immediate turn. And I suppose that's where my work now with regenerative governance, with the book, is really pushing on. We need to recreate a new mainstream where people can step in, because it's still like one by one, people are trying to find a path through getting different investments and so on. What they're saying is, we're going to go back to first principles, start off on a new track, and make it easy for people to do this, and natural rather than easy to do the exploitative, extractive, capitalism as usual. So that was what really impressed me. And the humility of the people. What they do is they bring somebody in to transform, but the humility of the people to say, well, it's worked so far and it works for us. We're not saying it's the model, and it's the people who do it. But they do those simple, fundamental transformational measures, transparency, and all the managers are repurposed to be in marketing and sales. So that's the third very powerful business principle underlooked. Let's get closer to customers, because very often these hierarchical structures tend to separation from customers too, which is fatal for a business in the long term. So, I think the oil companies are radically disconnected from from their customers, who most of whom do want a healthy planet for their children, but they've got so gone down a path, it's really hard for them to come back, and politicians almost don't allow them to either, because they're seen as the golden goose you can't kill. So anyway, so I think constantly I come back, whether it's with K2K or with sociocracy, which is another very thoughtful model for organizing based on circles, is how does it affect the ordinary person? How can they feel a connection from how they show up to the purpose? How is that engineered into the system so it's real for them? And the best employee-owned companies do that by having a sort of internal democracy, having a staff council who speaks for them and, you know, negotiates bargains with, and also collaborates with the board of directors to say we're all aligned here, and creates that feeling of wholeness. So I think that, and I think that's where I've ended up is really focused on 3 areas of this reconnection. One is about the ways of working, which is embodied by Thiel emphasizes, which sociocracy emphasizes, which K2K emphasizes, the ways of working. It matters how you hold a meeting, who facilitates it, how it's facilitated. It matters how you're organized. The second one is the ownership model, because fundamentally, the ownership speaks to who we're ultimately serving and who ultimately calls the shots.
That's
and
right.
In our society, typically, in large companies, it's a mob on the stock exchange. A mob, I say a mob because they've got a collective energy. You can't have a relationship with a mob. You just try and protect yourself and try and manage that relationship. You can't really have a healthy relationship with a mob. So the ownership's really important and under less in a small company, but it's really vital if you get to any scale. And then the investment models, because again, we're so used to money gives power. And so the normal hero's journey for a founder is I grow my business, I sell shares, get investment, and then I sell out. And as soon as you sell the first share to an investor, you're bound to them. You've got into bed with them, because you can't get them out unless you've anticipated that. So
right.
And immediately English law will say, and your duty is to them is before your duty to your customers or your staff or anything. Right. And so unless you anticipate that and change the rules and are upfront about that, the assumption is, if in doubt, money comes first. And because it's so normalized, it's seen as this is the water we swim in, and you're bizarre to even question that. So I'm an extremist because I say actually love and health of the planet and health of society comes before making money for an investor. But that's for most of the planet, that's normal. But for the investment community, that's an extreme position. The normal is the only way that we're going to grow the economy, which is seen as the ultimate goal for the whole of life, actually, is to grow the human economy, is investors must own and have ownership rights. And it's bizarre. And it's quite new in this, and actually fairly extreme in the UK and the US. In other countries, it's not so normalized in Japan and others. But in the UK and the US particularly, that idea of that religion of money and power and control is institutionalized.
So to help us understand a little bit, how is your nonprofit and how is your book helping us with reimagining these main 3 factors that you just named? How can they actually be used, employed by somebody who's listening or who's interested?
I'm pausing because there's almost a starting point is actually that pausing and saying, okay, I'm not going to rush down that path, which it feels like society is pushing me down, and saying, what's really important to me? And there's some really good work done on meaning, that humans are actually meaning driven more than purpose can be easily corrupted into I've got to get there and I don't care how I get there. We want peace, so I'm going to do war to get there. But meaning is talks to the lived experience of being human.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So meaning really speaks as now today. And if and I run workshops sometimes, I get people to think in the last week, what's been meaningful for you? And it tends to come into categories of, I walked in the forest alone, and I was just with myself, and that's very precious in our society. Or or I saw a beautiful view or something. The next one is sort of a sense of belonging, connection, unity with others. So I went for a walk with my wife, or with my dog, or I communed with the trees in my forest, or I had a great team. As a team, we really worked well together. The next one is something about expressing full potential. That can be achievement, but it can also be being creative, or being, this is who I am, and so I've been that. I've worn these amazing, I've worn this amazing thing and made a wow. And then there's a fourth one, which is about service to others. And generally, across all cultures, those seem to be fundamental drivers, that meaning that if you're in the, and famously Viktor Frankl in Auschwitz.
That's right.
Who was in Auschwitz. Afterwards, he wrote books about meaning, and he talked about how people found meaning, and even in these extreme conditions. So,
and if you found meaning, you were more likely to survive, actually.
And if you found meaning, you were more likely to survive.
Yes.
So that's a fascinating lens. So this is where I'm saying, in a way, I'm not. Partly, the book tries to give a set of examples of, here's some pioneers. So it's full of stories. Here's some pioneers who've taken a different turn.
Okay.
Mentioned 𝗪𝗁 and so on. So it's full of those, from ownership models to governance models to just simple practices, like an engineer friend of mine who runs his work rhythms through the phases of the moon, to remind him of the connection between, actually, in the new moon, he's got a different energy than in the full moon, which is an ancient wisdom that we've sort of poo-pooed, but it's so there's so
it gives you a rhythm that connects you to life, that makes it more
life,
you connect business with. Yeah,
exactly. So just actually to remember that disconnection, if we're in an office and winter, summer, we just do the same things.
Yeah.
So I think that, House of Hackney, for example, who've gone to a 4-day week, and they sort of pay their staff to spend a bit more time in nature during the week, and actively encourage them, because they know that it makes them better. It's better for the employees, better for the business. They don't see a separation. What's better for the employees, better for the business.
Yeah.
So the book is full of stories like that. It tries to maybe rather poetically remind people that what it's like to be human, that we're stardust, as Joni Mitchell said. And quantum physics says that we're not fundamentally separate from the trees and the Mars and the stars. That it's just a way of seeing, and actually, if we shift that. And it's also using a metaphor which is about seeing an organization as alive. So living, there's different words for this, but it's fundamentally a different way of relating to organizations. So it's hard to do it in words, but
more like a living being that actually pulsates and has life.
Exactly. And so the idea of controlling it or owning it seems bizarre. No more than I want to own my the neighbor's daughter or something, right? We've been there. We know ownership, but somehow our society recognizes that an individual owning an individual is slavery and bad, but an individual owning 50,000 people who work in a company is capitalism and the best way we can imagine to organize something.
Yeah.
So we're really paradoxical and perverse. So I bring a couple of frameworks in, because a living thing evolves. And changes. So I talk about how the ownership models you need in a young company that's got a founder is different from the models you might need later on, and the different language you use at different stages, which helps a business founder locate themselves and say, okay, what might be right? Is it time for me to bring in different investment, and what sort of investment? And what sort of collaborators, and what should be my ultimate goal? So it tries to point to different models. And then the business that Erica and Eve and I have formed, Regenerative Governance, it's an enterprise, but it's a non-profit. So fundamentally, it's in service to life, including, we're all part of life, so people and the planet. And so we're an enterprise, but so we're promoting fundamentally this new stream of this new direction for business, which is building on old traditions of Quakers and responsible business, but trying to say what are the right governance, ownership, leadership, management models and trying to popularize those, because there's lots of pockets of those all over. But how do you bring them together and mean someone can just say, I'm choosing that, and you don't have to spend £20,000, £50,000 on a lawyer and a consultant and so on. You can choose a path, and it's you know, you can go on a journey, and you're doing it with others. And so
just to kind of break it down, just also for me to understand. So your regenerative, it's like a consulting firm, or you would also be hired as a speaker, or you would just advise somebody. You would be.
It's all of those actually.
Okay.
So some of it's there's a strong education theme. Okay. So we will work with individual businesses who are saying, enterprises who are saying, we want to go on this journey. Can you help? We're on advisory boards as individuals. We're building a website that will start to share more and more information that people can access, whether through my book or blogs or podcasts or just links to other places. Okay. We'll be running cohorts of, 10, 15 people. We've been going for a year, and we've been experimenting. So this August, we're just sort of rethinking and planning for the next year. But the plan is definitely next year to run retreats, to choose outputs, to collaborate more with people like Purpose and others. So it's a mixture of, but mainly we want to, in the next few years, we want to touch, thousands of businesses who have got this yearning, maybe sometimes baby boomers who have run a business and then say, what's next for me? Well, employee ownership or steward ownership, these are obvious. If you care for your business, don't sell it to venture capital or to a massive company.
I'm actually curious if I might jump in there when you say, baby boomers and those that are ready maybe to hand over or sell their company due to their age, and they want to do it in a mindful way and really say, well, steward ownership or employee owned could be an option. And you say they have a yearning, like a longing. So can you describe a little bit the situation in the UK? Because I'm not so sure how to identify those, let's say, for example, in Germany. But I wonder, what's the situation in UK? What's your experience, and a few examples?
It's. I think we should probably do some research too. But based on my experience of wandering about and talking to people, there are people. I mean, one example, and he's a maverick, but Guy Watson was the founder of 𝗵𝗺𝗺 Organic Farmers. He started off as a farmer. The supermarkets would treat him like, worse than dirt. So he said, I'm going to sell directly to customers because actually the customers want good food. The supermarkets are less interested because they're only interested in making money. So, and he built that to a business with just putting his vegetables into boxes. He built it to there's now 1,000 employees, and it's only organic vegetables. And he got to a point where he was getting phone calls, aged in his late 50s. We'll buy your company. And a competitor had done that. And he thought, it just doesn't feel right. I want to sell it to the staff. So he did. And he sold it to the staff for a few £1 million, but about a third of what he could have sold it to venture capital.
Okay.
And they paid him, and the deal was they pay him back over, they generate the finances from the business and pay him back over a period of a few years. So that's one example. And he says, a year after he'd done that, he said, I've met a few business founders who really feel twisted. They've sold their business, but then they see what happens to it afterwards. I've never felt better. I'm feeling completely, the employees are doing a fantastic job of running the business. I'm feeling, this for me was the next, for him, he says, it's like the next natural evolution as a business owner to hand it over to people who care for it. Yes. Whereas the selling it feels like, okay, I'm rich, but
it's like a failure, a mini failure, whether I want to admit it or not.
Money doesn't bring meaning, Money can help. Obviously, as a certain level, beyond a certain level, the studies suggest, as long as you're earning enough, and we all have different stages of that, then and a hygiene factor. More money rarely brings more happiness. It just brings more clinging on sometimes to like the miser. So I think there are people who. I mean, Germany feels different with the Mittelstand, and there's a lot of family-owned business and so on.
That's right.
In the UK, I can't point to statistics, but I do know that both from dozens of conversations I've had, and also that the steward ownership is which is started in Germany, that sort of movement around steward ownership, is gathering pace in the UK, and so that's another thing that we're intending to do this year is provide a focal point for conversations around steward ownership in the UK. And we'll be doing
Can
some
you give us a
organising.
little bit of a description and definition? What is steward ownership? Because not everybody might be familiar with that term. It's
It's really good. I mean, again, first principles. Gandhi, 70 years ago, talked about a shift away from private ownership to a sort of trusteeship, he called it. So you're not owning it for your own ego needs and your own benefit. You're owning something for the benefit of the whole, if you like.
Right.
So again, a move to wholeness, away from it's mine to it's ours, but I've got a particular role because of my experience or knowledge or expertise, so I can hold it on behalf of. So steward ownership is really, that's the fundamental, to me, the underpinnings of steward ownership. Technically, it can look like minor variations on, you have a few people who are sort of trustees. They are in loco parentis, they're sitting there as the stewards of the organization.
And these can be people from outside of the organization at times, but also could be employees that feel ready and called to
well, exactly, and that's common. So, for example, in employee ownership context, that's very common. You might have an external person who brings some sort of independence. You have an internal, and you have a couple of internal people, employees.
So they're complementary.
They're complementary. So the employees are they're often elected. So it's quite a democratic structure.
Right. Right.
So yeah. So the essence is, and the second one is, there's no external investors who extract profit.
Right.
So in a steward ownership model. So the first one is, control is centered in the hands of the people who are running the thing. So you don't have remote people manipulating and controlling from the outside, saying, don't do that, just give me the money. Right. You don't report to external owners. You have trustees who are there to a slightly, arm's length, who are making sure the system has integrity. And excess profit is plowed back either into the business or is shared with stakeholders who are affected. So you're right. And even Karl Marx, who was an amazing thinker, even if some of his ideas have been misused, he said, profit is not a problem. I have no problem with profit. It's excess profit. And we have an excess profit problem in society where it goes to an increasingly small number of people. And the steward ownership model is much more, if you've built a business for a purpose, then the spare money goes back into the purpose, not into the hands of a few people who keep asking for more every year. So it's those two principles about profit and purpose aligned, and autonomy for the basic responsibility is held in the hands of the people running the business. Is the two principles. There are technically slight variations in how you organize that, but it's the business exists to serve the whole, not a few individuals. That's the essence of it.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit looking at the time. We have a few minutes left, and I just wonder if you want to maybe help us close and say, what's your vision? Looking at, UK, that's where you're based, that's where you have your network, but it goes beyond, obviously also into Europe and Spain, as we heard. And when you look at, let's say, the last 11 years, let's say, since we heard from Frédéric Laloux and reinventing organizations and what has happened since then, what makes you hopeful? Because we also spoke about that in our prep call, that you find it easier today than ever before to speak about these things and feel like you don't have to work against so much resistance and you don't have to convince so many people. So from where we are today in 2025, what do you see happening in the next, let's say, 2, 3 to 5 years? What's your vision? What's your hope? And what do you also think might be the challenges?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, I definitely feel a different vibe. I think when I first 20 odd years ago wandering about saying, this is all wrong, we've got to do something, I'd meet a few people who were asking similar questions, but there were very few, and mainly there was quite a lot of confusion, but just knowing we can't go that way, but which way do we go? And then 10 years later, I'd meet the same people and they'd be saying, well, we've sort of got a piece of the problem, we're working on it, we're busy. And then wind on, last year I went to a conference, the Blue Earth Summit in London, and there was thousands of people there, including racing drivers and all sorts. And some people would say it's a sign of greenwashing, but actually, people of pretty much any age from their early 20s to their, older than me, in their 70s or 80s were there, and there was thousands of people, and there's no way even 5 years ago you'd have had the same energy and the same.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and I'm finding language is changing with shift to regenerative. And the age of people, there's people of all ages, so that's a change too. It used to be more people like me who'd burnt out or just were rejected by the old system, and now it's people who take it for granted that climate change is a thing, and we're not properly addressing it. They don't need to be persuaded of that.
Yeah.
And therefore they're already in their 20s saying, so what do we do? And they're not convinced actually by the old story of we've just got to keep building, digging stuff out of the ground because that's the only way we know, which really, you can relate to coming out of the Second World War and having to rebuild. It makes no sense to someone born in the year 2000 to say we just got to keep rebuilding and knocking down. We're almost knocking down so we can rebuild now, just mindlessly. So I think in terms of hope and vision, I'm also inspired, old enough to remember where I was when the Berlin Wall came down. And there is something in complexity science and systems thinking of non-linearity, that these things, a butterfly, it's not a linear change from a caterpillar to a butterfly. The butterfly that I'm hoping will emerge from, extractive capitalism is starting to, I can feel the language and the thinking, we're starting to get that. And I think once it comes, you can already see that people are going, well, why wouldn't I do that? So I can feel this burgeoning movement that has almost started to crystallize. It's starting to crystallize something. And so I'm banking on hope, very hopeful that within the next 5 years, we can't wait longer than that there will be an absolute new type of mainstream. And doesn't mean there aren't people desperately clinging on to the old extractive capitalism, but I think an awful lot of them will have just got, gone bust and lost all the good people and just lost any sense of meaning anymore. And doesn't mean there won't be huge tensions between the two, but I'm just feeling this energy and this vibe, and it's much more fun to be in the let's create a loving world that cares for things than to be in that let's just build a lot of stuff and then knock it down and build some more and have bigger and bigger houses and bigger bank accounts and more time on screens. So I think doesn't mean I'm optimistic, right? I don't know. I think there's going to be some really hard. I think I'm hopeful but not optimistic. I think I'm not pessimistic. I'm not optimistic. I think I'm just like my parents went through the Second World War, and they, for a child, it wasn't a bad time. For some people, it was very, very painful. It's going to be painful in many ways, I think, for all of us, really. But hope means actually I'm choosing to show up in a way that I'm working towards something, and I'm finding more and more people who are finding that natural and wanting to align with that. And I think we've all been on a bit of a collective journey about what are we doing to ourselves. And more people are waking up, and David Attenborough and a whole load of people are saying we've got to go this way, and the pressure's building. And the politicians are clearly just, in a way, mindlessly running about saying, I've no idea what to do, so let's just pretend I'm doing something useful. So it's just really that you can see the end of times in some ways and the beginning of times, and it's going to be quite a journey.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick. I mean, so much of your energy and what you believe in, what you resonate with, certainly reaches me and my heart, my longing. And I really, really hope it does for a lot of the listeners, that we hope this reaches either right now in the live audience or in the future. We will also be posting this as a podcast, which will be a new version, a new edition that will hopefully make this work even more known. Thank you so much for your time, for your openness, for your vulnerability. And I just want to say also, this is a moment maybe to speak about your book. We haven't maybe mentioned the title. We want people to know what it is. Would you like to share briefly?
I will.
You have it in reach?
I was just going to...
maybe not. The Incomplete Circle. I can just...
It's called The Incomplete Circle,
yeah.
Rethinking Business from the Inside Out. And
yeah.
it's tries to be a not too lengthy, mulling, philosophical, practical storytelling journey to say this is what's going on in businesses. This is the perspective, and and it's trying to provoke and both and bring a sort of an understanding lens to what's happening, and
Yeah.
get beyond blame to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
let's really step back, really
Yeah.
look at what's going on, and make better choices, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
let's find meaning while we're doing that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. What a wonderful way to end our LinkedIn Live unbossing event today. Thank you so much. And I hope to meet you sometime in the near future in person.
You're very welcome, Marion. Yes, that would be good, wouldn't it? So
Thank you.
my
So
pleasure.
thank you so much also to our listeners, and see you and hear you next time. Bye-bye.